Butters Stotch might be the most tragic character in the history of adult animation. And I don't say that lightly. This is a kid whose own mother tried to drown him in a river. A kid who got locked in a bomb shelter for days because Cartman wanted to go to a birthday party. A kid who was sent to a conversion therapy camp over a prank he didn't even understand. He's been shot in the eye with a ninja star, hospitalized more times than any of us can count, manipulated by everyone he's ever trusted.
I see it! I see it! It's a meteor! Oh my god! Oh my god! Does it look like it's getting closer?
Rejected by every group he's ever tried to join.
Butters, you just don't really fit in with us here. We think it's best for all of us if you look for friendship opportunities elsewhere.
Gaslit by his own parents. Grounded for literally saving the world. And through all of it, every single time, he forgives. He dusts himself off. He says, "Oh, hamburgers," and he keeps going. And that's not even close to the worst of it. Because what makes Butters' story a real tragedy isn't any single moment. It isn't one bad day, or one cruel joke, or one terrible thing that happened to him. It's the pattern. It's 28 seasons, nearly 3 decades of television, of a kid who never stops believing people are good, living inside a show that never stops proving him wrong. It's the repetition. It's the accumulation. It's watching the same heartbreak in the same way 100 times and somehow keep beating. Picture this, season 5, episode 14. A little blonde kid in a blue jacket is following his dad through the streets of South Park, totally clueless about what he's about to find. His mom asked him to spy on his father's anniversary gift. Simple enough, innocent enough. But what Butters discovers that night will change everything we understand about this character. His father walking into a gay bathhouse. His mother staring at Butters from across the kitchen table with something broken behind her eyes. And then a car, a river, and a child who should not have survived. That's where the story of Butters Stotch really begins. Not with a joke, with a near drowning at the hands of the person who is supposed to protect him most. But now, let's slow things down, settle in, and get comfortable. Because we're going to go through Butters' entire journey properly. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every moment of pure innocence that this show used against him. So if you're watching this late at night, grab your blanket, get cozy, and before we go any further, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's get into it. So who is Butters Stotch, really? Before the tragedy, before Professor Chaos, before the beautiful sadness speech that made half the internet cry, who was this kid? Well, for a long time, he was nobody. Literally nobody. If you go back to the earliest seasons of South Park, back when the show first premiered on Comedy Central in August of 1997, Butters is just a face in the crowd. A background kid with no name, no voice, no story. He's sitting in a classroom or standing in a hallway, and nobody, not the writers, not the audience, not even the animators, thought twice about him. His first real speaking role didn't come until season 2, in an episode called Clubhouses. He had a line or two, passing a note between characters, and his voice was completely different from what you'd recognize today. Deeper, no stutter, no nervous energy, just a generic kid filling space. If you go back and watch it now, knowing everything that Butters becomes, it's almost jarring. You're looking at a character who has no idea what's waiting for him. None of the warmth, none of the vulnerability, none of the heartbreak. Just a placeholder, a body in a chair. And isn't there something fitting about that? That the character who would become South Park's emotional core started as nothing? That the most important person in the show's history began as the least important? It's almost like the writers accidentally created a metaphor for Butters' entire life story before they knew it was going to be one. In the world of South Park, and in the real world, the people who end up mattering most are often the ones nobody noticed at first. It wasn't until season 3 that everything changed. The episode was 2 guys naked in a hot tub, which aired in July of 1999. Stan gets stuck in a basement during a party, forced to hang out with the weird kids. Pip, Dougie, and this blonde boy, the show finally decides to call Butters. That's the first time we hear the name. That's the first time Matt Stone locks into the voice. That slightly stammering, slightly southern, impossibly earnest way of talking that would become one of the most recognizable voices in all of animation. And the name itself tells you something about this character before you even learn his story. His full legal name is Leopold Stotch. Leopold. It's a formal, almost old-fashioned name. The kind of name that belongs on a birth certificate and nowhere else. Nobody in 28 seasons of this show has ever called him Leopold. Not his teachers, not his parents, not his friends. He is Butters. Always has been. The nickname comes from the real person the character is based on. A guy named Eric Stowe, who's been South Park's animation director since basically the beginning. Trey Parker and Matt Stone knew Stowe since he was a teenager, and they used to call him Little Buddy, which over time, the way these things do, morphed into Butters. Stowe himself has talked about it publicly. At a University of Colorado commencement speech in 2014, he explained the whole evolution. Little brother, little buddy, Butters. And the personality fits. Stowe was, by all accounts, a genuinely nice guy. The kind of person Parker and Stone affectionately called a goody-goody, because he didn't like offending people. He grew up in Evergreen, Colorado, sheltered, kind, a little out of step with the more cynical people around him. Sound familiar? That's Butters. That real-world foundation. The fact that this character is rooted in a person Parker and Stone actually know and work with every day is part of why Butters feels so different from the rest of the cast. He's not a cartoon archetype. He's someone real, filtered through animation, and you can feel that difference from his very first featured scenes. When you watch two guys naked in a hot tub, there's a moment where Butters is just sitting in that basement, playing with the other unpopular kids, and he has this energy about him that none of the other characters have. He's not trying to be funny. He's not trying to be cool. He's just there, existing, happy to have company, happy to be included. It's a small thing, but in a show where every character is constantly performing, constantly posturing, constantly trying to be the smartest or the meanest or the most sarcastic person in the room, Butters' simple, unaffected presence stands out like a candle in a dark room. There's also something worth noting about how his relationship with the other kids was established early on. Even before he became a major character, Butters was positioned as the kid everyone picks last. The one who's always on the outside of the circle, literally and figuratively. In crowd scenes, he's often standing slightly apart from the group. When the boys make plans, Butters is the one they forget to include. When they need a volunteer for something dangerous or humiliating, Butters is the one they call. He fills a very specific role in the social hierarchy of South Park Elementary. The kid who everyone knows will say yes, because he doesn't know how to say no. That role, that position, is where everything starts. Before the tragic episodes, and the heartbreaking speeches, and the abuse from his parents, there's just this fundamental social reality. Butters is the most willing, most available, most exploitable kid in town. And the show knows it. The writers know it. And they use it, deliberately and effectively, to generate both comedy and pathos in a way that no other character can. Now, here's the thing about Butters' rise from background character to one of the most beloved figures in the entire show. It wasn't planned. Not really. What happened was, at the end of season 5, Kenny died. Not in the usual way where he comes back next week. Kenny was killed off for real in the episode Kenny Dies, and for the first time in the show's history, there was no fourth boy. Season 6 needed someone to fill that gap, and the writers chose Butters. For the first 5 episodes of that season, Butters is part of the main group. He's standing where Kenny used to stand. He's going on adventures with Stan, Kyle, and Cartman. He's the fourth friend, and it's immediately, painfully obvious that he doesn't belong. Not because he's a bad character, because he's too good, too kind, too eager to please. The other boys are cynical and sharp and jaded beyond their years. Butters is genuinely a child. He believes what people tell him. He wants everyone to like him. He takes everything at face value. And that gap between who Butters is and who the world around him needs him to be is where every ounce of his tragedy comes from. The fans picked up on this almost immediately. There was something different about Butters. In a show where every character is some shade of awful, Butters was purely good. And people didn't just find that funny, they found it moving. They cared about this kid in a way they didn't care about Stan or Kyle, because Butters was vulnerable in a way those characters never were. He could actually be hurt. Parker and Stone noticed. They've talked about how they gradually fell in love with the character, how Butters became one of their favorite people to write for. Parker has said that Butters and Cartman episodes are the easiest to write because the dynamic between them generates stories almost automatically. And there was even a point where the creators considered killing off Kyle permanently and making Butters a full-time member of the main four. They didn't go through with it, but the fact that it was on the table tells you how significant Butters had become. He wasn't just filling Kenny's spot anymore. He was becoming something the show needed. A character who could carry genuine emotion in a world designed to mock it. And it's worth pausing here to think about what it means that Butters resonated the way he did. South Park debuted in 1997 as the most provocative show on television. Its entire appeal was built on being offensive, irreverent, willing to go places other shows wouldn't. The audience came for the shock value. They stayed for the satire. But nobody expected to find a character they genuinely cared about in the way they cared about Butters. He slipped past the defenses that the show's cynicism had built. He made people feel things in a space that was designed to make people laugh at things. And once that happened, once the audience decided they loved this innocent, stammering kid, the writers had a tool they'd never had before. They had a character whose pain could land, whose suffering meant something, whose moments of joy felt earned in a way that nothing else in South Park ever did. And then came the episode that changed everything. The one that proved Butters wasn't just comic relief. The one that made people sit up and realize this character could carry real emotional weight. Season 5, Episode 14, Butters' very own episode. The setup is almost sitcom sweet. It's Butters' parents' wedding anniversary, and his mom asks him to follow his dad around town to figure out what gift he's planning. Butters is thrilled. He loves his parents. He wants to help. So he tails his dad through South Park with this innocent little grin on his face, completely unaware that what he's about to discover is going to shatter the Norman Rockwell image of his family. His father, Stephen Stotch, isn't buying anniversary gifts. He's visiting places no father should be visiting. Places that have nothing to do with gifts or anniversaries or anything a 9-year-old should ever have to see. And Butters, sweet, clueless Butters, follows along without understanding any of it. He follows his dad like it's the most normal thing in the world, because to him, it is. His dad told him to meet him later, and Butters just happened to see these stops along the way. He catalogs them the way a child catalogs anything, literally, without context, without judgment. He goes home and reports back to his mother with this cheerful, matter-of-fact description of everywhere his dad went. You can picture the scene. Butters standing in the kitchen, his mom sitting at the table, and this innocent little boy describing what he saw with the same enthusiasm you'd use to describe a trip to the grocery store. Every word is destroying her. And Butters doesn't know. He can't know. The gap between what he's saying and what he's revealing is the entire engine of the episode, and it's both hilarious and horrifying. Linda Stotch, Butters' mother, does not take this well. What happens next is one of the darkest scenes in South Park history, and it's played with this unsettling calmness that makes it worse. Linda decides that she can't live with what she's learned. She decides that everything about her family is a lie, and in that moment of desperation, she does something unforgivable. She takes Butters, drives to the edge of town, and tries to make him disappear. It is the most harrowing thing the show has ever depicted, and it is played without a single joke. No punchline, no cutaway, just a mother breaking, and a child who has no idea why. I need you to understand what this means in the context of this show. South Park has been pushing boundaries since 1997. It's killed Kenny in every conceivable way. It's tackled terrorism, school shootings, religious extremism, racial violence. Very little is off limits. But there's something about this scene that hits differently. Maybe it's because it's not played as spectacle. Maybe it's because there are no aliens or supernatural elements or absurdist escalations to soften it. A mother puts her child in a car and drives it into a river. That's it. No metaphor. No parody. Just the most primal betrayal a human being can experience. The person who gave you life deciding to take it away. And the way the show shoots it, if you can call it shooting in an animated series, is deliberately understated. There's no dramatic music cue, no slow motion. Linda stands on the bridge and watches. The car sinks, and the audience sits there, in their living rooms, watching a comedy show, trying to figure out how to feel about what they just saw. Let that sit for a second, because this is a cartoon. This is a show that kills Kenny for laughs every week. But this isn't played for laughs. The show frames this moment with genuine horror. The car sinking, Butters inside it, his mother standing on the bridge watching. And somehow, impossibly, Butters survives. He crawls out of that river. He walks home. And when his parents see him standing there, alive, soaking wet, confused, they don't rush to comfort him. They don't apologize. They don't call the police on themselves. They cover it up. They gaslight their own child into believing nothing happened. They move on. And the next time Butters does something his parents don't like, something completely trivial, completely normal, they ground him. Because that's what the Stotches do. That's who these people are. The episode was a critical success. IGN gave it an 8.5 out of 10. Fans pointed to it as the moment they understood Butters as more than a punchline. This was a kid living in a house where the people who were supposed to love him unconditionally had tried to kill him and then pretended it never happened. And the show didn't flinch from that. It didn't wrap it up neatly. It let the horror exist alongside the comedy, and it trusted the audience to hold both at the same time. That's the thing about Butters' very own episode that makes it so important. It established a tonal duality that would define Butters for the next 2 decades. You can laugh at the absurdity of his parents' behavior, the ridiculous cover story, the over-the-top grounding, and simultaneously feel something cold in your stomach because underneath the jokes, what you're watching is child abuse. Real, recognizable, psychologically devastating child abuse. The episode is also a masterclass in how South Park uses parody to deliver emotional gut punches. The whole thing is structured as a satire of the classic American family sitcom. The happy music, the Bennigan's dinner, the cheerful, "What did you learn today, Butters?" aesthetic. It looks and feels like a 1950s family show for the first act, and then it peels back the wallpaper and shows you what's rotting underneath. The Stotch family isn't just dysfunctional, it's a lie. The wholesome exterior is a performance that Steven and Linda maintain through denial, control, and eventually violence. And Butters, the only member of the family who isn't performing, the only one who genuinely believes they're a normal, happy family, is the one who pays the price for that delusion. There's a particular scene in the episode that doesn't get talked about enough. After Butters survives the drowning and returns home, he's confused, but not angry. He doesn't understand what happened. He was in the car, and then he was in the water, and then he was walking home, and none of it makes sense to him. And his parents, rather than confronting what Linda did, sit down at the kitchen table and craft a narrative. They tell Butters a story about what happened. A story that rewrites the attempted murder as an accident, that reframes the whole evening as a misunderstanding. And Butters accepts it. Not because he's stupid, but because the alternative, that his mother tried to kill him, is too terrible for a child's mind to process. He believes the lie because he has to, because the truth would destroy the only foundation he has. That's gaslighting. Real, clinical gaslighting. The kind that psychologists write papers about. And the show captures it with a precision that suggests someone in the writer's room understood exactly what they were depicting. It's not played for laughs in that moment. The comedy comes before and after. But the gaslighting itself is presented with an almost documentary clarity that makes it impossible to dismiss as just another South Park gag. And that's the Stotch family in a nutshell. Stephen Stotch is a man with anger issues, secrets, and a parenting philosophy built entirely around control. He grounds Butters for everything. For things Butters did wrong. For things Butters didn't do. For things that happened to Butters that were completely beyond his control. The grounding is constant, reflexive, almost Pavlovian. Something goes wrong, Butters gets grounded. And because this is a comedy, the show plays it as a running gag. But running gags have a way of accumulating weight when you watch them across 28 seasons. After a while, the laughter starts to taste different. Linda Stotch is, in some ways, even worse. Not because she's more actively cruel, though the attempted drowning would certainly qualify, but because her instability is unpredictable. Stephen is consistently authoritarian. You know what you're getting. Linda can snap. She can go from pleasant suburban mother to genuinely dangerous in the space of a scene. And Butters, who loves both his parents desperately, has to navigate this household without ever understanding why it feels so unsafe. If you look at this through the lens of actual child psychology, and I think the show invites you to, whether intentionally or not, what you see in Butters is a textbook portrait of a child raised under authoritarian parenting. The research on this is extensive. Kids who grow up with highly demanding, emotionally cold, punishment-driven parents tend to develop a specific set of traits. Anxiety, a desperate, almost pathological need for approval. People-pleasing behavior that goes way beyond normal kindness. Difficulty understanding their own boundaries because nobody ever respected those boundaries in the first place. Poor self-regulation. The internalized belief that love is something you have to earn through compliance. That affection is conditional, contingent on being good enough, quiet enough, obedient enough. That's Butters. Every single one of those traits is written into his character. His constant stammering when he's nervous. His willingness to do literally anything if someone tells him it will make them happy. His terror of being grounded, which isn't really about the grounding itself, it's about the withdrawal of parental love that the grounding represents. For Butters, being grounded means being rejected by the only people whose opinion he cares about. And he'd rather endure anything, humiliation, danger, physical harm, than face that rejection. And there's a subtle cruelty to how the grounding works in the show's larger context. For most kids, being grounded is an inconvenience. For Butters, being grounded is existential. It's the mechanism by which his parents communicate disapproval. And for a child whose entire self-worth is built on parental approval, the threat of grounding is the threat of emotional annihilation. Watch how Butters reacts whenever someone mentions that he might get grounded. His whole body changes. His voice gets higher. He starts rubbing his knuckles together, that nervous tick that's become his signature gesture. He doesn't fear the grounding itself. He fears what it represents, the withdrawal of love, however conditional and unstable that love has always been. There's also the question of what Butters' home life looks like between the episodes we see. South Park shows us the dramatic moments, the near drowning, the lockdown, the screaming. But what about the quiet days? What about the Tuesday mornings where Butters gets ready for school and his dad barely looks at him? What about the dinners where Linda is pleasant on the surface but cold underneath? The show implies a household where tension is the default, where calm is just the space between storms. And for a child, that constant low-level anxiety, the knowledge that things could go wrong at any moment, for any reason, in ways you can't predict or prevent, is often more damaging than the outbursts themselves. It's the drip, drip, drip of emotional neglect that erodes a child's sense of safety so gradually that they don't even realize it's happening until there's nothing left. The thing that makes the Stotch parents stand out in South Park isn't just that they're bad parents. Lots of South Park parents are bad. Cartman's mother is negligent and enabling. Kenny's parents are alcoholic and impoverished. Randy Marsh is, depending on the episode, either well-meaning, but idiotic, or genuinely irresponsible. But none of those parents tried to murder their child. None of them systematically gaslit their kid afterward. The Stotches aren't just bad parents. They're dangerous ones. And the show knows it. It uses them to push the satire of American parenting to its absolute breaking point, asking the audience to consider how much abuse a kid can absorb before it stops being funny. The answer, of course, is that it never stops being funny on the surface. South Park is too good at comedy for that. But underneath, if you're paying attention, the laughs come with a cost. Every time Butters says, "Yes, sir," to his father, or nervously rubs his knuckles together because he's scared of getting in trouble, you're watching the behavioral artifacts of a child who has been conditioned to flinch. I want to sit with that for a moment. The image of Butters rubbing his knuckles, stammering out, "Yes, sir," to a father who's already decided he's in trouble. Because that image, that small, seemingly insignificant animation detail, contains more truth about the experience of growing up in an emotionally abusive household than most prestige dramas manage in entire seasons. The people who made this show knew what they were drawing. They knew what those knuckles meant. And that's why the grounding gag works. It's funny on the surface. The idea of a kid being grounded for the most absurd, unfair reasons is classic comedy. But it accumulates. Over seasons and years, the gag becomes a weight. Each new grounding adds a layer. And eventually, if you've been paying attention, you stop laughing. Not because it stops being funny, but because you start seeing the kid behind the joke. You start seeing Butters. Now let's talk about what happens when a kid like Butters finally breaks. Or tries to. Season 6, Episode 6, Professor Chaos. This is supposed to be Butters' villain origin story. And in a way, it is. But it's the saddest villain origin story ever told. Because Butters doesn't turn evil out of genuine malice or some dark philosophical revelation. He turns evil because the boys kick him out of the group. After 5 episodes of being the fourth friend, 5 episodes of trying so hard, of being so eager, of doing everything he could to fit in, Stan, Kyle, and Cartman decide that Butters is too lame. They hold a literal competition to replace him. A reality show style elimination, parodying The Bachelor, where kids audition for the role of fourth friend. And Butters has to watch. He has to stand there and see himself being rejected in the most public, humiliating way possible. So he snaps. Kind of. In the way that only Butters can snap, which is to say not very effectively, but with everything he has. The scene where it happens is worth describing, because it tells you everything you need to know about who Butters is at his breaking point. He goes home. He sits in his room. He looks in the mirror. And in that mirror, he sees a kid who has been told by his parents, by his classmates, by the entire social structure of South Park, that he is not enough. Not cool enough. Not funny enough. Not worth keeping around. The mirror scene is played as a villain origin story parody, with dramatic music and close-ups. But underneath the parody is a real moment of a child deciding that if the world won't accept him for being good, maybe it will notice him for being bad. He decides to unleash his dark side. He creates Professor Chaos, a supervillain alter ego complete with a tinfoil helmet fashioned from aluminum foil and a cape made from a bath towel, standing in front of his bathroom mirror with his arms raised in a pose of defiance that would be terrifying if it weren't so achingly sad. His sidekick is Dougie, another rejected kid who becomes general disarray. Together, they're going to wreak havoc on South Park. They're going to make the world pay for how it treated them. And here's where it becomes unbearably sad. Their evil plans are pathetic. Not pathetic in a, they'll get better at this way. Pathetic in a, this child has no capacity for real darkness way. They switch soup orders at a restaurant. They steal a teacher's erasers. They try to flood the world with a garden hose. Professor Chaos's grand schemes for destruction are the ideas of a 9-year-old who doesn't actually know what evil looks like, because despite everything that's been done to him, Butters has never internalized cruelty. Think about that. This kid has been abused by his parents, abandoned by his friends, humiliated repeatedly. And when he finally tries to be bad, when he makes a conscious decision to embrace darkness, the worst he can come up with is switching someone's soup. His rebellion is as innocent as he is. Even his shadow self is made of light. The follow-up episode, Simpsons Already Did It, takes this even further. Every evil scheme Butters comes up with has already been done on The Simpsons. He can't even be original in his villainy. He tries to block out the sun. Simpsons did it. He tries to behead a statue. Simpsons did it. The running gag is funny, but it's also doing something sneakily profound. It's saying that Butters can't be a villain because the role doesn't fit him. The universe itself won't let him be evil. He's too fundamentally good, and even his attempts at rebellion are doomed to be harmless. There's a psychological reading of Professor Chaos that I think the show is aware of, even if it never states it explicitly. When a child grows up in a repressive, controlling environment, when every impulse is monitored, every behavior is punished, every deviation from obedience is met with consequences, that child's anger doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It finds an outlet. And for Butters, that outlet is Professor Chaos. It's the only space where he's allowed to be angry, the only identity where his frustration has permission to exist. But because Butters is who he is, even that anger is gentle. Professor Chaos isn't a real threat to anyone. He's a kid playing pretend, acting out a fantasy of agency and power that he's never been allowed to have in his real life. The tinfoil helmet isn't armor. It's a cry for help wrapped in a joke. And somehow, that's both the funniest and the saddest thing about Butters' character. He can't even be bad, right? In a town full of people who are casually, effortlessly terrible, Butters can't manage a single act of genuine malice. His darkness is performative. His goodness is bone deep. There's a detail in the Professor Chaos episodes that I think gets overlooked. General Disarray, Dougie, is another rejected kid. He was also cut from the competition to be the fourth friend. And when Butters recruits him as a sidekick, there's a moment of genuine connection. Two boys who've been told they're not good enough, bonding over shared rejection. Even Butters' villainy is really about companionship. He doesn't want to destroy the world. He wants someone to eat lunch with. He wants a friend who won't kick him out when someone better comes along. The tinfoil helmet is a costume, but what it covers is a kid who just wants to matter. And the tragedy of Professor Chaos isn't that his plans fail. It's that he needs Professor Chaos at all. No child should have to invent an alter ego just to feel like they have permission to be angry. But that's where Butters is. That's where the world has put him. I also want to point out something about the Simpsons Already Did It running gag that goes beyond the surface level humor. Every time Butters comes up with a plan, and it turns out the Simpsons already did it, what the show is really saying is that there's nothing original about Butters' rebellion. His anger, his frustration, his desire to lash out, it's all been done before. By better villains, in better shows. Butters can't even be unique in his suffering. The world has seen it all, and it's not impressed. For a kid who already feels invisible, that's a devastating realization. Even your pain is generic. That contrast, the gap between who Butters tries to be and who he actually is, carries through every major Butters episode that follows. And the next one on the list might be the most disturbing of all. Season 9, Episode 9, Margarine. The premise sounds almost lighthearted on the surface. The boys discover that the girls have a device that can predict the future, which is actually just a paper fortune teller, one of those folded paper things every kid has made at some point. But Cartman, being Cartman, is convinced it's real technology, and the boys decide they need to steal it. Their plan? Send someone undercover to a girl's sleepover. And the someone, of course, is Butters. But here's how they do it. They don't just have Butters put on a wig and walk over. They fake his death. They throw a pig carcass dressed in Butters' clothes off a building so everyone in South Park thinks Butters is dead. Then they dress Butters up as a girl, a new student named Margarine, and send him to infiltrate a slumber party. I want to slow down here because the visual details of this episode are important for understanding just how far the boys are willing to go. They obtain an actual pig carcass. They dress it in Butters' clothes. They drop it off the Bowery building in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, in front of Butters' own parents. His mother screams. His father collapses. The town holds a funeral. There are flowers and tears and eulogies. The entire community of South Park believes that a child is dead, and the boys who orchestrated this elaborate hoax show no remorse whatsoever. They're already focused on the sleepover mission. Butters' death is just a step in the plan. Take a step back and look at what's happening here. The boys' plan requires Butters to cease to exist. His identity has to die, literally and publicly, so they can use him as a tool. He's not a friend in this scenario. He's an instrument, a means to an end. And Butters goes along with it because that's what Butters does. He says yes. He always says yes. At the sleepover, things don't go smoothly at first. The girls are hostile to Margarine. They mock him. They're cold. They're dismissive. And Butters, in character as this new girl, takes the insults to heart. He ends up crying in the bathroom. Actually crying. Not performing. Genuinely hurt by the rejection. Because even in disguise, even in a situation he didn't choose, Butters can't protect himself from caring what people think of him. And then something interesting happens. The girls find him crying, and they soften. They apologize. They give him a makeover. They bring him into the group. For a brief, fragile moment, Butters is accepted, not as himself, but as someone else entirely. It's one of the quieter tragedies in the episode. The only way Butters can experience belonging is by not being Butters. But the real horror of Margarine happens at home. While Butters is at the sleepover, his parents are grieving his supposed death. And Stephen Stotch, despite being warned repeatedly by a local farmer not to do this, digs up what he thinks is Butters' body and reburies it at an old burial ground. It's a Pet Cemetery parody, and it's played for maximum creep factor. When Butters comes home, his parents don't see their living son. They see a demon. They lock him in the basement. When he says he's hungry, his father kills a door-to-door saleswoman with a shovel and offers the body as food. Let me say that again. His parents lock him in a basement and try to feed him a dead person. It's absurd. It's South Park at its most insane. But it's also doing something the show does constantly with Butters, taking the subtext of how his parents treat him and making it text. They don't see him as a person. Not really. He's something to be managed, controlled, dealt with. When he's alive, they ground him. When he's dead, they try to resurrect him. When he comes back, they treat him like a monster. Butters exists in a family where his humanity is never quite the point. There's another layer to Margarine that's easy to miss on a first viewing. When Butters is disguised as a girl, he experiences something he's never experienced as Butters. Genuine, spontaneous acceptance from peers. The girls go from hostile to kind. They do his makeup. They include him. They share secrets with him. And for that brief window, sitting in a circle at a slumber party wearing a wig and a dress, Butters is happy. Not anxious happy, not trying to please happy, but actually, genuinely, contentedly happy. And he can't keep it. He has to go back to being Butters. He has to take off the wig and return to the life where nobody accepts him just for existing. The episode never addresses this directly. It's South Park, not a therapy session, but the emotional undercurrent is undeniable. Butters found belonging, and it required him to be someone else entirely. That's not a joke. That's a wound. The Pet Cemetery subplot adds another dimension. The idea that Butters' parents would sooner believe he's a demonic abomination than a living child who came home says everything about how they see him. In their minds, the Butters they know is dead. The thing standing in front of them can't possibly be their son, because their son wouldn't disobey the narrative they've constructed. When Butters returns from the sleepover, he's violated the story his parents told themselves. That he was dead, that they'd grieved, that the chapter was closed. And rather than revise the story to accommodate reality, they revise reality to accommodate the story. Their son is a demon now. Lock him in the basement, feed him a corpse, anything but admit that the world is more complicated than they want it to be. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's exactly what the Stotches have always done. When reality contradicts their preferred narrative, when Steven's secret life is exposed, when Linda's murder attempt fails, when Butters comes home from the dead, they don't adapt. They gaslight. They rewrite. They lock inconvenient truths in the basement and pretend everything is fine. And the boys? They got their fortune teller. Mission accomplished. Butters' psychological devastation is a footnote. That's how Butters functions in this show. He's the collateral damage. He's the person everyone uses and nobody thinks about afterward. The boys don't lose sleep over what they put him through. His parents don't reflect on their behavior. Butters absorbs the blow, and the world moves on. But Butters doesn't move on. Not really. He carries it all. Every insult, every betrayal, every moment of cruelty. He carries it and he keeps going, and he keeps trusting. And the question the show keeps asking, whether it knows it or not, is whether that makes him stupid or brave. I think it makes him brave. But I understand the argument for stupid. And I think Butters himself would shrug and say it doesn't matter, because he doesn't have another option. Being open, being trusting, being kind, that's not a strategy for Butters. It's who he is. He couldn't turn it off if he wanted to. I think about that a lot when I watch Butters episodes. The way the show moves on. The way the credits roll and next week it's a new story and Butters is back at school and nobody mentions what happened. There's no therapy. There's no reckoning. There's no adult who sits down with Butters and says, what they did to you was wrong and you didn't deserve it. The abuse happens, Butters absorbs it, and the show continues. And maybe that's the most realistic thing about it. Because that's how it works in the real world too. For a lot of kids, nobody comes. The bad thing happens, and then it's Monday, and you have to go to school and pretend everything's normal because the adults in your life have decided that it is. Butters pretends really well. He has to. Which brings us to one of the funniest and most uncomfortable Butters episodes in the entire series. Season 13, Episode 9. Butters' Bottom Bitch. The premise is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. Butters is desperate to get his first kiss so the other kids will stop making fun of him. He pays a girl named Sally Darson $5 for a kiss on the playground. And it works. He gets his kiss. He's thrilled. And he discovers something remarkable. People will pay for affection. So Butters starts a kissing company. He recruits girls to sell kisses to boys. He takes a percentage. And without understanding any of what he's doing, without grasping even slightly what the real-world equivalent of his business model is, Butters becomes a pimp. The episode is a satire of sex work and law enforcement. Sergeant Yates goes undercover as a female prostitute to try and bust the operation, but the real genius of it is the contrast between Butters' complete innocence and the world he's accidentally wandered into. He doesn't abuse the girls working for him. He doesn't threaten them. He treats them with genuine kindness and respect, which is played for laughs because that's the opposite of how pimps are portrayed in media, but it's also making a real point. Butters is good at this. Accidentally, absurdly good. Precisely because he doesn't know how the system is supposed to work. His ignorance of cruelty makes him, paradoxically, better at the job than anyone who understands it. Other prostitutes leave their actual pimps to work for Butters because he's nicer. That's the joke. That's also the commentary. A child with no understanding of exploitation accidentally creates a more humane operation than the adults running the real thing. And Butters goes through the entire episode thinking he's just helping people feel less lonely. His motives are pure, even when his actions are, objectively, insane. The episode was watched by over 2.5 million households. It's rated 8.9 on IMDb, one of the highest rated Butters episodes in the series. And it works because it understands the fundamental Butters equation. Put an innocent person in a dark situation, and the contrast reveals truths about both the innocence and the darkness that you couldn't see otherwise. There's a specific moment in Butters' Bottom Bitch that I want to highlight because I think it captures something essential about his character. When Butters is running his kissing company, he treats the girls working for him with this completely unironic respect and kindness. He asks them how their day was. He makes sure they're comfortable. He genuinely cares about whether they're happy. And the girls respond to that. They like working for Butters. They feel safe with him. Which is, of course, the joke. That the most ethical pimp in South Park is a 9-year-old who doesn't know what the word means. But it's also a sincere observation about what happens when someone approaches an exploitative system without any understanding of how exploitation works. Without the cruelty, the system actually functions better. Butters accidentally proves that kindness is a more effective management strategy than fear, and neither he nor the show's other characters have any idea how profound that is. There's also something deeply uncomfortable about the Sergeant Yates subplot, where a police officer goes so deep undercover as a prostitute that the investigation becomes indistinguishable from the crime it's meant to stop. The show is drawing a parallel between law enforcement and the sex trade, both claiming to serve the public good while actually perpetuating harm. And Butters, in his complete innocence, is the fulcrum between them. He's the only person in the entire episode who isn't pretending to be something he isn't. The cops are pretending to be criminals. The criminals are pretending to be business people. Butters is just Butters, being nice to people because that's all he knows how to do. But here's the uncomfortable part. The show is, in this episode, using Butters. Just like the characters within the show use Butters. The writers put him in an absurd, inappropriate situation because his naivety makes the jokes land harder. And there's something honest about that. The show is doing to Butters exactly what it criticizes the other characters for doing. It's exploitation played as comedy. And whether you think that's brilliant meta-commentary or just plain cruel probably depends on how much you like Butters. I lean toward brilliant, for what it's worth. I think South Park's willingness to be self-aware about how it treats Butters, to acknowledge, through the structure of its own storytelling, that it's doing to him exactly what Cartman does, gives the whole thing a layer of integrity that pure cruelty wouldn't have. The show knows. It knows it's using this character. And by knowing, by letting us see that it knows, it creates a space where the audience can choose how to feel. You can laugh. You can wince. You can do both at the same time. And all three responses are valid, because the show has been honest enough to give you all the information. And that question, comedy or cruelty, is central to the most important relationship in Butters' life. The one that defines him more than his parents, more than the other boys, more than any single episode. Butters and Cartman, the most toxic friendship in television. And I use the word friendship loosely, the way you might use the word relationship to describe what exists between a predator and its prey. If you want to understand what makes Butters tragic, not sad, not pitiable, but genuinely, structurally tragic in the literary sense, you have to understand this dynamic. Because Cartman isn't just mean to Butters. Cartman is systematically, deliberately, psychologically abusive toward Butters in a way that mirrors real patterns of manipulation and control that psychologists have spent decades studying. Let's start with Casa Bonita. Season 7, Episode 11. Kyle invites Butters to his birthday party at Casa Bonita, a real restaurant in Denver that Trey Parker and Matt Stone loved as kids. and which they eventually bought in real life in 2021, and doesn't invite Cartman. Cartman is furious, not because he cares about Kyle, not because the party matters to him as a social event, because he wants to go to Casa Bonita. He wants the sopapilas, and the cliff divers, and the experience. That's it. The entire nightmare that follows, the imprisonment, the psychological torture, the days of terror that Butters will endure, all of it happens because Eric Cartman wants to eat at a theme restaurant. So Cartman devises a plan. He tells Butters that a meteor is about to hit Earth, that the government has issued a warning, that everyone needs to take shelter immediately. And here's the thing, Butters has no particular reason to doubt him. In the world of South Park, where aliens land regularly and supernatural disasters happen every other week, a meteor strike isn't even that outlandish. But more importantly, Butters trusts Cartman, despite everything, despite Casa Bonita being just the latest in a long line of manipulations. Butters trusts him because Butters trusts everyone, because the alternative, living in a state of constant suspicion about the people around you, is something his brain simply won't allow. Butters believes him. Of course he does. Cartman tells him to hide in a bomb shelter for safety, and Butters climbs in without hesitation. Because why would his friend lie about something like that? Why would anyone lie about something like that? Cartman locks him in. For days, Butters sits in that shelter, terrified, believing the world is ending. Cartman brings him food and water, which is one of those details that makes the whole thing worse, because it means Cartman isn't trying to kill Butters. He's not indifferent to whether Butters lives or dies. He just doesn't care about the psychological damage. Butters' terror, his confusion, his loneliness in that dark space, none of that registers as real to Cartman. Butters' feelings aren't real to Cartman. They never have been. When search parties start checking bomb shelters, Cartman moves Butters to an abandoned gas station and seals him in an old refrigerator. Butters ends up at a dump. Eventually, a junkyard worker tells him the truth. There was no meteor. Cartman made it all up. And Butters, sitting in the wreckage of a junkyard, has to process the fact that someone he considered a friend imprisoned him for days and lied to him about the end of the world, all so that person could eat enchiladas at a theme restaurant. And there's one more detail about Casa Bonita that I want to mention, because it speaks to something about Butters that the episode doesn't underline, but that hangs in the air like smoke. After Butters is rescued, after the truth comes out, after everyone knows what Cartman did, Butters doesn't seek revenge. He doesn't demand justice. He doesn't even seem angry, at least not in the way you'd expect. He's hurt, yes. Confused, yes. But the dominant emotion isn't rage. It's bewilderment. Butters genuinely cannot understand why someone would do this to him. The cruelty doesn't compute. It breaks his model of how people work. And instead of updating the model, instead of concluding that Cartman is dangerous and should be avoided, Butters just resets. He patches the crack and goes back to default. Because default, for Butters, is trust. And trust, for Butters, is survival. Then there's Awesome O. Season 8. Cartman disguises himself as a robot, a cardboard box with the word Awesome O written on it, and shows up at Butters' house, claiming to be a Japanese automatron sent to be his personal companion. And Butters, this kid who has every reason to be suspicious of the world, who has been lied to and manipulated more times than we can count, looks at a boy in a cardboard box and sees a robot. He sees a friend. Butters opens up to Awesome O in ways he never opens up to anyone. He shares his secrets, his fears, his hopes. He talks to this robot with a vulnerability that he can't show to real people because real people always use it against him. And that's exactly what Cartman is planning to do. Collect Butters' secrets and use them as blackmail. But here's the twist, and it's one of the rare moments of justice in Butters' story. Butters reveals that he has a video of Cartman dressed as Britney Spears, making out with a cardboard cutout of Justin Timberlake. Suddenly, the power dynamic flips. Cartman can't expose Butters without Butters exposing him. And in the end, when Cartman's disguise fails, he farts, because of course he does. Butters plays the video for everyone. The entire town sees it. The military sees it. Movie producers see it. And for once, just this once, Butters wins. It's a satisfying moment, but it's also rare enough to prove the rule. Butters almost never wins against Cartman. The default state of their relationship is Cartman taking and Butters giving until there's nothing left. And then there's the episode that might represent the worst thing Cartman has ever done to Butters. Season 11, Episode 2. Cartman sucks. Cartman takes a compromising photograph of Butters and uses it to humiliate him. The details aren't important. What's important is what happens to Butters as a result. His parents, instead of investigating or protecting their son, send him to a place called Camp New Grace, a conversion therapy camp where counselors try to pray away what they've decided is Butters' confusion about his sexuality. Butters didn't do anything. He didn't choose to be there. He doesn't even fully understand why he's there. The counselors talk about his confusion, and Butters, who wasn't confused about anything before he arrived, starts to become confused, which is exactly how these places work in real life. You tell someone often enough that there's something wrong with them, and eventually they start looking for the wrongness. They start examining themselves for defects they didn't know they had. They start believing that the people in authority must know something they don't, because why else would they be saying these things? That's the mechanism of institutional harm. It doesn't require malice from the individual counselors. Some of them genuinely believe they're helping. What it requires is a system that takes a child's identity and tells them it's a disease. A system that mistakes kindness for weakness, openness for confusion, and difference for disorder. Butters walks into that camp as a perfectly healthy, if somewhat bewildered, kid. And the camp starts working on him immediately, trying to reshape him into something he isn't. Because the people running it can't conceive of a world where he's fine exactly as he is. The episode aired in 2007, at a time when the debate around conversion therapy was becoming a mainstream issue. South Park's take on it is characteristically blunt. The camp is depicted as harmful, absurd, and deeply disconnected from the children it claims to serve. But the show doesn't just satirize the institution. It shows the human cost. It shows Butters sitting in a circle, listening to adults tell him he's broken, and slowly starting to believe them. That's not comedy. That's documentation. The episode's climax is powerful. A boy at the camp named Bradley, who has developed feelings for Butters, threatens to kill himself because he believes he's unfixable. And Butters, standing on the edge of that crisis, delivers a speech that cuts through every layer of comedy the show has built. He says he's tired of being told he's confused. He says if God made him this way, then maybe God is confused too. He says he won't let anyone make him feel broken anymore. It's a moment of genuine moral clarity from a character the show usually treats as a doormat. And it works because Butters isn't performing wokeness or reciting a message the writers want to deliver. He's just a kid who's tired. Tired of being told who he is by people who don't know him. Tired of being punished for things that aren't his fault. Tired of absorbing everyone else's damage and being expected to smile through it. The Camp New Grace episode is also significant because it shows what happens when Butters' fundamental goodness is placed in a system designed to break it. The counselors at the camp aren't evil in the cartoonish South Park way. They believe they're helping. They're soft-spoken and earnest and genuinely convinced that what they're doing is in the children's best interests. And that makes them more dangerous, not less. Because you can't fight sincere conviction the way you fight open cruelty. When someone hurts you and they believe they're saving you, there's nowhere to put the anger. There's no villain to point at. There's just a room full of well-meaning people slowly dismantling your sense of self while smiling at you. Butters navigates this with the same instinct he brings to everything: openness. He doesn't resist the counselors. He doesn't rebel. He sits in the circles and does the exercises and tries with his whole heart to understand what they want from him. And when he finally speaks up, when Bradley is on that ledge and the stakes are real and the stakes are a child's life, what comes out of Butters isn't rehearsed. It's raw. It's the accumulated frustration of a kid who has been poked and prodded and analyzed and judged by every adult in his life, finally saying, "Enough. I'm fine. Leave me alone. I was fine until you told me I wasn't." The pattern across all of these episodes, Casa Bonita, Awesome O, Cartman Sucks, and dozens of smaller moments scattered across 28 seasons, reveals something that I think qualifies as one of the most psychologically realistic dynamics in television comedy. Cartman treats Butters as a resource, not a person, a thing to be used when useful and discarded when not. And Butters keeps coming back. That's not stupidity. That's trauma bonding. In real psychology, trauma bonding describes the emotional attachment that forms between a victim and their abuser when cycles of abuse are interspersed with periods of apparent kindness. The brain processes the good times, the moments when Cartman is friendly, when he includes Butters, when he treats him like an actual companion, with the same neurochemical reward response that makes any positive relationship addictive. And the bad times, the manipulation, the humiliation, the cruelty, create stress hormones that actually strengthen the attachment rather than weakening it. The victim doesn't stay because they enjoy the abuse. They stay because their brain has been trained to crave the relief that comes between the abusive episodes. Butters is, essentially, addicted to the possibility of Cartman being nice. Every time Cartman includes him, every time Cartman seems to need him, Butters' brain lights up with hope. And that hope is strong enough to override the memory of every terrible thing Cartman has done, because hope is the last thing an optimist gives up. It's dark. It's real. And the show plays it for laughs, which is either South Park's greatest trick or its cruelest tendency. Maybe both. I want to stay with this dynamic for another moment, because I think most analyses of Butters and Cartman focus on the spectacle, the bomb shelter, the robot costume, the photograph, and miss the quieter, more insidious dimension of the relationship. The big episodes get the attention, but the real damage happens in the spaces between them. In the 100 small moments across 28 seasons where Cartman says something dismissive to Butters, and Butters absorbs it. Where Cartman volunteers Butters for something dangerous, and Butters goes along. Where Cartman makes a plan, and Butters' role in the plan is always the worst one. The one that involves the most risk, the most humiliation, the least reward. These moments aren't episodes. They're textures. They're the background radiation of Butters' life. And they condition him in ways that the big dramatic betrayals can't, because they're too small to resist. You can fight back against being locked in a bomb shelter. You can't fight back against the 1,000 tiny moments where someone treats you as less than human so casually that even they don't notice they're doing it. That's the real horror of the Butters-Cartman dynamic. It's not the extraordinary cruelty. It's the ordinary kind. The kind that happens every day, in every school, between kids who don't have the language to describe what's happening to them. Cartman isn't a supervillain. He's the kid in every classroom who figured out that being mean is a form of power, and that some people, the kind ones, the gentle ones, the Butters, will let you get away with it indefinitely because they don't know how to stop you. But there are moments when Butters fights back. Small moments, scattered and imperfect, but they exist. The Awesome O blackmail tape. The Camp New Grace speech. Later episodes where Butters refuses to play along or stands his ground against Cartman's schemes. These moments are important not because they change the fundamental dynamic. They don't. But because they prove that Butters has a spine. It's buried under layers of conditioning and trauma and desperate people-pleasing. But it's there. And when it surfaces, the show treats it with a respect that it doesn't always show Butters. Now I want to talk about what might be the most important scene in Butters' entire existence. The scene that more people reference, more people quote, more people have been genuinely moved by than anything else this character has ever done. If you know one thing about Butters, even if you've never watched South Park, even if you couldn't name another character in the show, you probably know this scene. It's the reason half the internet has a soft spot for a cartoon kid from Colorado. Season 7, Episode 14. Raisins. It aired on December 10th, 2003, and nothing about Butters Stotch was ever the same afterward. The setup is a classic South Park dual storyline, and the way the episode uses parallel structure is one of the smartest things the show has ever done. In one storyline, Stan Marsh has just been dumped by Wendy Testaburger. The love of his elementary school life has ended things, and Stan is devastated. He can't eat, can't sleep, can't function. He stops talking to his friends. He loses interest in everything. He falls into a full goth phase. Black clothes, dark music, hanging out at the Village Inn coffee shop with the goth kids, chain smoking, and writing terrible poetry about how everything is meaningless and love is a lie. It's a convincing portrait of how a lot of people handle heartbreak, by constructing an entire identity around the pain so they never have to sit with it directly. Meanwhile, Butters has a parallel heartbreak that ends up being the emotional centerpiece of the entire episode. The boys take him to a Hooters-style restaurant called Raisins, where the waitresses, who are all elementary school-aged girls, flirt with customers for tips. It's South Park's way of satirizing the entire Hooters business model by applying it to children, which immediately makes the audience uncomfortable and is, of course, exactly the point. Butters falls for a waitress named Lexus. He falls hard. And when I say hard, I mean the full 9-year-old catastrophe. He lights up when she smiles at him. He reads meaning into every casual touch. He starts planning his future around this relationship that exists entirely in his own head. He thinks she likes him back. He thinks those smiles are real, that the attention means something, that he's found someone who genuinely cares about him. He hasn't. Lexus is doing her job. The flirtation is professional, impersonal, and completely meaningless. She treats every customer the same way. The smiles are a technique. The touches are calculated. There is nothing personal about any of it. But Butters doesn't know that. Butters can't conceive of that. And this is where the character's defining trait, his inability to imagine that people would be deliberately deceptive, becomes the engine of genuine heartbreak. The idea that someone would fake kindness for money is so foreign to his understanding of the world that it simply doesn't compute. He's not in denial. He genuinely cannot process the concept. Because in Butters' world, when someone is nice to you, they mean it. When someone smiles at you, it comes from a real place. The alternative, that warmth can be manufactured, that affection can be transactional, isn't something he has a framework for understanding. And isn't that the saddest thing? Not the heartbreak itself, but the worldview that makes it possible. Butters gets hurt because he can't imagine a world where people are dishonest about their feelings. He gets hurt because he's too good. And the show lets that sit without comment, without judgment, without any character stepping in to explain it. It just happens. Butters loves someone who doesn't exist. The real Lexus, the Lexus beneath the professional smile, is a stranger. And nobody tells him until it's too late. When his parents try to explain the truth, that the Raisins girls are nice to everyone, that it's part of the business model, that Lexus doesn't actually like him, Butters refuses to believe it. He storms off to find Lexus and declare his love. And she, casually, without malice, without even fully looking at him, tells him they were never together. She says it the way you'd correct a small factual error. Like it's obvious. Like it shouldn't hurt. It devastates him. You can see it happen in real time. The moment the truth lands. The moment his face changes. The moment the world he built in his head collapses. It's animation, but the emotion is completely real. The voice performance in that scene is devastating. Butters doesn't scream or throw things or make a dramatic exit. He just stands there. He stands there and lets it wash over him, the way a small animal stands in the rain, because it doesn't know where to go. Butters ends up sitting alone in the rain, crying. The goth kids find him and invite him to join them. And this is where it happens. This is where Butters delivers a speech that has become one of the most quoted, most shared, most genuinely beloved moments in South Park's entire run. He's sad. He admits it freely. There's no performance, no posturing, no attempt to look strong. His voice is small and his face is wet, and he's sitting on the curb outside a coffee shop with a group of goth kids who want him to say that life is meaningless and pain is the default state of existence. Everything in the scene is pushing Butters toward darkness. Every character, every visual cue, every narrative expectation is saying, this is where you give up. This is where you stop being Butters. But then he says something that Stan, in his own identical heartbreak, couldn't find his way to. He says, in his own quiet, stammering way, that he's actually happy that something could make him feel this sad. That it makes him feel alive. That it makes him feel human. That the only way he could feel this bad is if he felt something really good before. And so, he says, he has to take the bad with the good. And what he's feeling is like a beautiful sadness. Not good, not pleasant, beautiful. The word choice matters. Butters doesn't call the sadness acceptable or tolerable or manageable. He calls it beautiful. He aestheticizes his own pain. He finds something worth preserving in the worst feeling he's ever had. And he does it not through denial or delusion, but through an act of radical acceptance that would make a Zen master nod. He takes the sadness and he holds it up to the light, and he says, look at this. Look at what I'm capable of feeling. This pain is the evidence of my aliveness. This grief is the receipt for the joy that came before it, and I wouldn't trade either one. I'm going to take a moment here, because I think this is one of those rare scenes in television, in any television, not just animation, not just comedy, where a show accidentally or intentionally touches something universal, something that people carry with them long after the episode ends. What Butters articulates in that moment is, essentially, an existentialist philosophy that thinkers have spent centuries trying to express. Kierkegaard wrote about sadness as a pathway to self-discovery, what he called the dizziness of freedom, where we confront life's uncertainties and have to choose how to respond. The existentialist tradition broadly argues that suffering has transformative potential, that pain forces us to grapple with the fundamental questions of freedom and responsibility and meaning. And here's Butters, a 9-year-old cartoon character standing in the rain, expressing in 30 seconds what philosophy departments spend entire semesters unpacking. The power of the scene comes from contrast. In the same episode, Stan responds to heartbreak by shutting down. He joins the Goths. He embraces numbness. He decides that feeling nothing is better than feeling pain. It's a completely understandable response. Probably the more common one, honestly. When the world hurts you, you build walls. You stop caring. You protect yourself. Butters does the opposite. He stays open. He refuses to let the pain make him smaller. He takes the hit, fully and without defense, and he says thank you for it. Not because he's delusional or because he doesn't understand what just happened. He understands perfectly. He knows he's been hurt. He knows the girl didn't love him. But he also knows that the capacity to feel that pain is the same capacity that lets him feel joy, and he's not willing to sacrifice one to escape the other. The goth kids don't know what to do with this. They've built an entire identity around the idea that life is suffering, and the only sane response is to lean into the darkness. And then this blonde kid in a turquoise jacket shows up and says, basically, yeah, life is suffering. Isn't that amazing? It rejects cynicism without being naive. It acknowledges pain without drowning in it. It's the emotional thesis statement of Butters' entire character arc, and arguably the emotional thesis statement of South Park itself, a show that spends most of its time being cynical and cruel, but contains, at its core, this tiny blonde kid who believes that feeling things is better than not feeling them, even when feeling things gets you hurt. And think about the construction of that scene from a purely cinematic perspective. The rain, the isolation, the goth kids standing in a circle around this crying child, offering him membership in their club of darkness. Every visual element is telling Butters to give up. The weather is telling him to give up. The other characters are telling him to give up. The entire atmosphere of the scene is designed to push him toward numbness, toward the conclusion that feeling things is a mistake, and the only rational response to heartbreak is to stop feeling entirely. And he refuses. Not defiantly. Not heroically. Not with a grand gesture, or a clenched fist, or a soaring musical cue. Quietly. Gently. With tears still running down his face, and his voice cracking, and his hands probably rubbing his knuckles, because that's what they do when he's overwhelmed. He refuses to let the world make that choice for him. He refuses to let heartbreak turn him into someone else. He refuses to trade the pain of feeling for the safety of numbness, because he understands, intuitively, instinctively, in a way that he couldn't explain if you asked him, that the trade isn't worth it, that the pain is the price of admission to a life fully lived, and he'd rather pay it than sneak in through the back door. That's what separates Butters from Stan in this episode, and I think it's what separates Butters from the rest of South Park as a whole. Stan, confronted with the same pain, chooses armor. He puts on the black clothes. He joins the Goths. He decides to be someone who doesn't care. It's a defense mechanism, and it's a completely human one. Most of us have done some version of it. When the world hurts you, you build a wall. You cultivate an edge. You become someone who can't be touched because you've already decided that nothing matters. Butters can't do that. He physically, spiritually, constitutionally cannot do that. He's tried. Professor Chaos was his attempt at armor, and it fell apart because the armor didn't fit. Butters' entire being is oriented toward openness, toward feeling, toward the vulnerable act of caring about things. And in the Raisin speech, instead of treating that as a weakness, he reframes it as a gift. The sadness isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's proof that the machinery of his heart is working, that he's capable of connection, that life is happening to him in all its terrible, beautiful fullness. Fans responded in a way that few South Park moments have ever prompted. Critics took notice too. The Herald and Review called it one of the most heartfelt and sincere soliloquies in the show's history, which is a remarkable thing to say about a show that has spent most of its existence avoiding sincerity like a contagious disease. The speech has been shared millions of times across social media. It's been turned into fan art, into tattoos, into motivational posters that hang in college dorm rooms and therapists' offices and bedrooms of people going through their worst nights. People who have never watched a single episode of South Park know the beautiful sadness speech. They found it on Tumblr or Reddit or Instagram, stripped of context, floating free from the show that created it, and it landed on them like a hand on the shoulder. It transcended the show, completely and irreversibly. The speech doesn't need South Park anymore. It doesn't need Butters, or the Raisins restaurant, or the Goth Kids, or the rain. It has become its own thing, a piece of emotional wisdom that exists independently in the culture, available to anyone who needs it. A reminder that grief isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that something went right, and then ended. And endings, however painful, are the price of beginnings. I think that's the highest compliment you can pay a piece of writing, that it outgrew its origin, that it became bigger than the character who said it, bigger than the show that contained it, bigger than the medium that delivered it. Butters' beautiful sadness speech is one of those rare moments where fiction touches something so real that it stops being fiction. It stops being a cartoon kid standing in the rain and starts being every person who has ever loved someone and lost them and had to decide what to do with the hollow space that's left. After Raisins, something shifts in how the show treats Butters. Not dramatically. He's still the punching bag, still the naif, still the kid who gets grounded for breathing wrong. But there's a new dimension. The writers seem to understand that they've created a character who carries real emotional weight, and they start using that weight more deliberately. Butters becomes the moral center of South Park, not because he's always right, but because he always feels. In a town full of people who have numbed themselves to everything, Butters is the only one still paying attention to what it means to be human. And there's something worth noting about how the show positions Butters' emotional authenticity against the other characters' coping mechanisms. Stan drinks, eventually. Kyle moralizes. Cartman manipulates. Kenny dies and comes back without anyone caring. Each of the main boys has developed a way to avoid sitting with their feelings. Butters is the only one who doesn't have a buffer. He processes everything in real time, with no filter and no protection. It makes him vulnerable. It makes him easily exploited. But it also makes him the only character in South Park who is fully, uncomfortably alive. I wonder sometimes if that's why the writers keep hurting him. Not out of cruelty, though the show certainly has that capacity, but because Butters is the only character whose pain registers as real. You can't make the audience feel something by hurting Cartman, because Cartman usually deserves it. You can't make them feel something by hurting Kenny, because Kenny will be back next week. But hurt Butters, and the audience flinches. Every time. Without fail. He's the show's most effective emotional instrument, and like any instrument, he only works if you play him. That's a complicated thing to sit with as a viewer. The idea that the character you love most is also the character the show uses most deliberately. That his suffering serves a narrative purpose. That the tears you feel watching him are, in a sense, engineered. But I think that's also what makes great storytelling. The best characters aren't the ones who escape the machinery of their narrative. They're the ones who make you forget the machinery exists. Butters makes you forget. Every single time. Let's move forward a few seasons. Season 16, Episode 11, Going Native. This is a weird one. Butters starts the episode acting out. He's angry. He's aggressive. He beats up a kid named Scott Malkinson at school. And if you've been watching this show for long enough, you know immediately that something is wrong. Because Butters doesn't beat people up. Butters doesn't get angry. Butters absorbs anger from others and converts it into nervous compliance. So when he lashes out, it's alarming. It's a crack in the foundation. His parents sit him down and tell him something he's never heard before. He's originally from Hawaii. He's going through a biological phase, like salmon returning to their birthplace, and he needs to go back to complete a ceremony called Hapanoa. It's framed as a rite of passage, a cultural ritual connected to Butters' origins. Now, this is South Park, so the Hawaiian heritage angle is played through a satirical filter. The native Hawaiians Butters meets turn out to be white American timeshare owners. The cultural ceremony gets interrupted by a business dispute. The episode is ultimately more about tourism and cultural appropriation than about Butters' identity. But underneath all that, something real is happening. For the first time, Butters has a history that's separate from South Park. He has roots somewhere else. He has an origin that his parents didn't define and can't control. And his anger, the anger that sent him to Hawaii in the first place, is acknowledged as legitimate. The show is saying quietly that all the abuse has been accumulating. That Butters' endless patience isn't infinite. That somewhere beneath the stammering and the hamburgers and the desperate people-pleasing, there's a reservoir of rage that has been filling up for years. Kenny goes with him to Hawaii, which is worth noting. Of all the boys, Kenny is the one who actually cares about Butters. Not consistently, not perfectly, but genuinely. Kenny accompanies Butters on this journey not because he's been tricked or manipulated into it, but because he sees that Butters needs help. Their friendship, quieter and less dramatic than the Butters-Cartman dynamic, is one of the show's more understated relationships. Kenny, who dies every other episode and comes back without anyone caring, and Butters, who survives everything and comes back without anyone noticing. There's a symmetry there that the show rarely addresses directly, but that floats beneath the surface of their interactions. Going native doesn't resolve Butters' anger. It doesn't wrap up neatly with Butters finding peace, or his parents apologizing, or the abuse stopping. The episode ends, and Butters goes back to South Park, and everything returns to normal. But the anger was there. We saw it. And we know it's not gone. And honestly, I think the anger is the most important thing about this episode. Because until going native, you could tell yourself that Butters was fine. That the abuse rolled off him. That his endless cheerfulness meant the damage wasn't really accumulating. Going native takes that comfortable fiction and destroys it. Butters is not fine. He's never been fine. He's been performing fine, the way abused children learn to perform fine. Because the alternative, showing the anger, showing the pain, showing the cracks, invites punishment. And Butters has been punished enough. The episode also does something interesting with the concept of belonging. Butters goes to Hawaii looking for a place where he fits, a community that claims him as one of their own. And what he finds is another performance. The native Hawaiians are just tourists who've been there long enough to feel proprietary about paradise. The culture isn't real. The heritage is a construct. Even Butters' search for authentic identity leads him to another layer of pretense. But Kenny is there. Kenny followed him. And in the end, that might be the only genuine thing in the episode. One kid who cared enough about another kid to get on a plane. It's a small comfort, but for Butters, who has spent his entire life surrounded by people who use him, even a small comfort is enormous. Now let me take you through a rapid tour of Butters across the broader landscape of the series, because his tragedy isn't confined to a handful of spotlight episodes. It's woven into the fabric of the show in ways that are easy to miss if you're not looking for them. Butters appears in hundreds of episodes. He's there in the background, reacting to things, getting dragged into schemes, being volunteered for dangerous tasks, quietly absorbing the chaos of South Park while everyone else generates it. And each of those appearances, however small, adds another brushstroke to the portrait we've been painting tonight. So let me hit the highlights. The moments that expand Butters' story beyond the major episodes and show just how deep and wide his tragedy really runs. Season 11, The Imagination Land Trilogy. This is a 3-part epic where terrorists attack the realm of imagination, and all the fictional characters, good and evil, go to war. Butters, of all people, is chosen as the key to saving Imagination Land. He's a real person inside a world of imaginary beings, and that gives him the power to conjure good characters from his mind to fight the evil ones. He's literally the chosen one. The trilogy aired over 3 consecutive weeks in October 2007, and it's one of the most ambitious things South Park has ever attempted. A sprawling fantasy epic that sends characters into a world populated by every imaginary being ever conceived, from Santa Claus to Gandalf to the woodland critters. It's big, it's cinematic by South Park standards, and it puts Butters at the absolute center of the action. And what does Butters do when he learns he's the key to everything? He hesitates. He's scared. He doesn't believe he's capable of saving anyone. Because why would he? Nothing in his life has ever told him he has power or value or agency. He's been conditioned to believe that he's small and insignificant. And when the fate of imagination itself rests on his shoulders, his first instinct is to say he can't do it. But he does it. He faces the fear, he digs deep, and he saves Imagination Land. It's one of his most heroic moments in the entire series, and it happens in a 3-part special that most people remember for the Cartman-Kyle-Bet subplot, rather than for Butters' actual heroism. Even in his finest hour, Butters gets overshadowed. And there's something painfully fitting about that. In the real world, the quiet heroes always get overshadowed. The people who show up, who do the work, who hold things together when everything is falling apart. They're not the ones who get the credit. The credit goes to the loudest person in the room, to the Cartmans. And the Butters of the world learn to be okay with that, because they were never doing it for the credit in the first place. They were doing it because someone had to, and nobody else was going to. But it still hurts. If you watch the Imagination Land trilogy with Butters as your focus, if you track his journey from terrified bystander to reluctant hero to the person who literally saves all of Imagination, you see a complete narrative arc that, in any other show, would be the main character's defining moment. In South Park, it's a subplot, and Butters goes back to school the next week, and nobody mentions it. Because that's what happens to people like Butters. They save the world, and then they get grounded for being late to dinner. Season 15, Episode 9, The Last of the Mohicans. The boys play a game of Texans versus Mexicans, a kind of large-scale capture the flag where one team plays border patrol and the other plays immigrants trying to cross. Butters, playing a Mexican character, takes the game extremely seriously. Too seriously. He gets so committed to the bit that he actually ends up crossing into Mexico, where he's mistaken for a real immigrant returning home. And then something remarkable happens. In Mexico, Butters becomes a folk hero. He's given the name Mantequilla, which is just butter in Spanish, a detail I love, and people start following him. He becomes a symbol of return, of homecoming, of the Mexican worker who crossed the border, worked hard, and came back. It's satire, obviously. The episode is commenting on immigration and labor and the way American culture simultaneously exploits and vilifies immigrant workers. But underneath the satire, something real is happening to Butters. He's thriving. Away from South Park, away from his parents, away from Cartman and the other boys, Butters is genuinely thriving. He's confident. He's competent. He's making decisions, and people are respecting those decisions. He hasn't changed. He's the same person. He's still kind, still earnest, still fundamentally Butters. But in this new context, removed from the people who diminish him, those qualities make him a leader instead of a target. People follow him. People admire him. He inspires a movement. And you realize, watching this, that Butters has always had this in him. The capacity for leadership, the ability to inspire, the charisma, because that's what it is, a genuine charisma rooted in kindness rather than dominance, that draws people to him. He didn't gain something in Mexico. He lost the people who were holding him back. The tragedy is that he has to leave the country to find that out. Season 19, Episode 5, Safe Space. This one might be the most meta Butters episode of them all, and I mean that literally. The show takes on internet culture and the concept of safe spaces, and Butters gets conscripted into a task that functions as a perfect allegory for his entire existence. He's made responsible for filtering negative comments from people's social media feeds. He has to sit at a computer and read through every cruel, hateful, vicious thing that strangers write online, and delete the ones that might hurt someone's feelings. He absorbs the toxicity so others don't have to see it, and it breaks him. Of course it does, because that's what Butters has been doing his entire life, just without the computer. He's been absorbing the toxicity of everyone around him, his parents' dysfunction, Cartman's cruelty, the boys' casual disregard, so that the social ecosystem of South Park can keep functioning. He's the kid who takes the hit so the group doesn't have to deal with the consequences of its own behavior. And in Safe Space, the show makes that metaphor explicit, almost uncomfortably so. Butters sitting at that computer, eyes glazing over, reading comment after comment about how people are ugly or stupid or worthless, It's Butters' entire life compressed into a visual gag. The episode also introduces the character of reality, a personification of the real world that keeps intruding on people's carefully constructed safe spaces. And there's a moment where reality confronts the town about what they've done to Butters, about the fact that they've turned a child into an emotional dumpster for their own comfort. It's one of the few times the show directly acknowledges, within its own narrative, that what happens to Butters is wrong. Not funny wrong, just wrong. Season 20, Episode 4, Wiener's Out. This one is interesting because it shows a version of Butters we've rarely seen. Butters as an ideologue. After being dumped online by his Canadian girlfriend, another heartbreak in a long list of heartbreaks, another person who turned out not to care the way he thought they did, Butters doesn't retreat into sadness this time. He channels his pain into something unexpected. He starts a protest movement. At a girls' volleyball game, Butters stands up and pulls down his pants, and the other boys follow. One by one, they stand up and do the same thing. It becomes a movement. Wiener's Out. A protest against something. The beauty and the comedy of the episode is that nobody, including Butters, can quite articulate what they're protesting. It's anger without direction. It's pain looking for an outlet. It's a group of boys who feel humiliated and powerless, channeling those feelings into the only act of rebellion they can think of. It's absurd. It's very South Park. But it's also significant for what it reveals about Butters. He's leading, not following, not being manipulated, not doing someone else's bidding. He's making a choice. A weird, misguided, deeply South Park choice. But a choice. He's channeling his emotions into agency. And the other kids listen to him. They follow him. For once, Butters isn't the last one picked. He's the first one in. He's the voice of a movement. And even though the movement itself is ridiculous, the fact that Butters can inspire it tells you something about the raw emotional power he carries. People feel what Butters feels. They just don't usually have the courage, or the naivety, depending on your perspective, to express it the way he does. Season 21. The show brings back Professor Chaos in franchise prequel, where Butters has been running a fake news operation as his villainous alter ego. It's a commentary on misinformation and social media manipulation, but it's also a sign of how far Butters has come from the kid whose evil plans involved switching soup orders at Bennigan's. 21 seasons in, Professor Chaos is actually competent at something. He's built a real operation. He has resources. He's causing actual problems for the boys' superhero franchise plans. Still not genuinely evil. Butters can't manage that. But capable. Resourceful. Operating independently rather than as someone else's tool. And that evolution of Professor Chaos mirrors something real about how suppressed anger develops over time. In the early seasons, Butters' villain persona was pure fantasy. A kid in a tinfoil hat with no real power and no real plan. By season 21, Professor Chaos has figured out how the world actually works. He understands leverage. He understands information warfare. The anger that couldn't even switch a soup order in season 6 has learned, over 15 seasons of absorbing abuse and manipulation, how to be effective. It's still not malicious. Butters doesn't want to hurt anyone. Not really. But it's competent now. And competent anger, in a character who's been powerless his entire life, is something new. Something the show hasn't had to reckon with before. There's also something worth noting about the timing. The franchise prequel episode aired in 2017, coinciding with the release of the video game South Park, The Fractured But Whole, where Professor Chaos serves as a major antagonist. Butters' alter ego had become popular enough, iconic enough, to anchor a storyline in an AAA video game. The kid who started as a background character was now selling copies. That's the kind of cultural penetration that happens when a character resonates on a level that goes beyond entertainment. People don't just watch Butters, they identify with him. They cosplay as Professor Chaos. They quote the beautiful sadness speech at funerals and weddings, and in therapy sessions. He stopped being a character somewhere along the way and became a symbol. And then comes what might be the most significant Butters episode in years. Season 26, Episode 5, Dick and Bouse Hot Dogs. Butters opens an ice cream parlor and earns his own money. For the first time, he has something that's his, not given to him by his parents, not orchestrated by the other boys, but earned through his own effort. Cartman, being Cartman, sees an opportunity. He convinces Butters to invest his savings into a hot dog restaurant, one that Cartman intends to control. It's the classic pattern. Cartman sees something Butters has, and he takes it. But this time, something different happens. Butters gets angry. Real anger, not Professor Chaos anger. He takes control of the restaurant himself. He turns it into a success. And when overseas investors come calling, Butters sells the business on his own terms. For the first time in 28 seasons, Butters breaks free from Cartman's control. Not through a twist or a gag or someone rescuing him. Through his own agency, his own decision, his own refusal to be used anymore. Multiple outlets reported on this episode as a turning point. The consensus was clear. South Park finally let Butters escape Cartman. After 2 decades of exploitation, the show's writers decided that Butters had earned the right to stand on his own. And the post-COVID specials added another dimension to this evolution. In those specials, set in a future where the boys are adults, Butters has fully embraced the Professor Chaos identity. He goes by Victor Chaos, and he's a very different person from the stammering, knuckle-rubbing kid we've watched for decades. The specials suggest a future where Butters didn't just escape Cartman, he escaped the version of himself that everyone else defined. He stopped being the good kid, the easy target, the emotional sponge. He became someone else entirely. Whether that's a happy ending or a sad one depends on your perspective. On one hand, Butters got out. He broke free from the patterns that defined his childhood. On the other hand, the cost of that freedom was Butters himself. The open, trusting, impossibly kind person we watched grow up. That person had to die for Victor Chaos to be born. And there's something genuinely tragic about that. Not because Victor Chaos is a villain, but because the world made it impossible for Butters to survive as Butters. The kindness that defined him became, in the end, something he had to shed in order to live. I don't know if that's a happy ending. I don't know if one episode of Independence can undo 26 seasons of damage. But it's something. It's a crack in a pattern that seemed unbreakable. And sometimes that's all you get. Not a revolution, not a transformation, not a dramatic before and after. Just a crack. Just a moment where the pattern wobbles and something new becomes possible. And maybe that's more realistic than a clean ending would be. In the real world, people don't escape toxic dynamics in one dramatic moment. They do it gradually. They take one step, then another. Then they fall back. Then they take 2 more steps. The Dyke and Bouse episode isn't the end of Butters' story. It's a beginning. A quiet, imperfect, deeply human beginning of something that might, eventually, look like freedom. It's also worth noting that the way Butters achieves his independence is entirely consistent with who he's always been. He doesn't fight Cartman. He doesn't scream or threaten or manipulate. He works hard, he builds something real, and he makes smart decisions. He beats Cartman not by becoming like Cartman, but by being better than Cartman in ways that actually matter. He wins through competence and integrity, 2 things Cartman has never had and never will. And that, I think, is the ultimate statement the show makes about Butters' trajectory across 28 seasons. You can abuse someone for decades. You can use them and discard them and take everything they have. But if that person is genuinely good, not performatively good, not good because they don't know any better, but deeply, constitutionally, unshakably good, eventually the goodness wins. Not because the world gets better, because the person was always better than the world gave them credit for. Butters earned that growth the hardest way possible, by surviving everything the show threw at him and still being capable of standing up. Alright, we've been at this for a while now. If you're still awake, thank you for staying with me. If you fell asleep somewhere around the Casa Bonita section and just woke up, welcome back. Either way, we're approaching the end of this journey, and I want to slow down one more time and really sit with the big question that's been floating beneath everything we've talked about tonight. So why does Butters Stotch matter? Why, out of all the characters in South Park's sprawling, anarchic, deliberately offensive universe, does this one resonate so deeply with so many people? I've been thinking about this question for a long time, and I think the answer has multiple layers, like an onion that keeps making you cry, no matter how many you peel back. So let's go through them, one at a time. The first is that Butters is the most human character on the show. Not the most realistic. South Park isn't interested in realism, but the most human in the sense of being the most emotionally recognizable. Every other kid in South Park is a caricature of something. Stan is the straight man. Kyle is the moralist. Cartman is the id. Kenny is the running gag. They're functions as much as they are characters. But Butters is just a kid. He's nervous and hopeful and easily hurt and trying his best and failing constantly. He has the personality of an actual child in a show where every other child behaves like a tiny adult. And that gap between Butters' genuine childhood and everyone else's performed maturity is what makes him both funny and heartbreaking. The second answer goes deeper, and it requires you to think about why audiences form emotional attachments to fictional characters in the first place. We don't just watch characters. We recognize ourselves in them. We see our own experiences refracted through their stories. And Butters represents something we all recognize but rarely talk about. The experience of being too kind for the world you live in. Everyone knows a Butters. Everyone has been a Butters at some point. The person who trusted too easily, forgave too quickly, kept believing in people who didn't deserve it. And watching Butters get hurt for those qualities over and over again activates something protective in the audience. We want to shield him. We want to tell the other characters to leave him alone. We feel, watching Butters, the way we wish someone had felt about us during our own moments of undeserved vulnerability. The third answer is philosophical, and it ties back to the beautiful sadness speech. Butters embodies the existentialist argument that feeling, even feeling pain, is inherently valuable. That the alternative to suffering isn't comfort, it's numbness. And numbness, however tempting, is a kind of death. Butters refuses to die that way. He refuses to become cynical, to build walls, to stop caring. Not because he's too stupid to know that caring hurts, but because he's wise enough to know that not caring hurts worse. That's a radical idea for a show like South Park. This is a series that has spent nearly 3 decades arguing that everything is ridiculous, nothing is sacred, and the only honest response to the world is irreverence. And then here's Butters, standing in the middle of all that irreverence, being completely sincere, being completely open, being completely willing to get hurt. And the show doesn't destroy him for it. It can't. Because without Butters, South Park is just cynicism. It's just nihilism wearing a comedy mask. Butters is the evidence that the show has a heart. That somewhere beneath the shock value and the political satire and the fart jokes, there is something that believes in goodness. Something that thinks kindness matters, even when the world punishes it. And I think that's why so many people who don't even watch South Park know who Butters is. He's transcended the show. The beautiful sadness speech alone has reached people who have never seen an episode, who wouldn't recognize Stan or Kyle if you showed them a picture, but who found that quote somewhere on the internet during a bad night and felt understood. Butters has become a cultural touchstone for a very specific kind of human experience. The experience of being too soft for a hard world and choosing not to harden. There's a psychological concept that I think is relevant here and it's called post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that some people who experience trauma don't just survive it, they actually grow from it in ways that wouldn't have been possible without the suffering. They develop greater empathy, deeper relationships, a stronger sense of purpose, a richer appreciation for life. It's not that the trauma was good. It's that the human being who went through it is extraordinary enough to extract meaning from the wreckage. Butters embodies post-traumatic growth more purely than almost any character I can think of, in any medium. Every horrible thing that happens to him makes him more compassionate, not less. Every betrayal makes him more trusting, not less. Every heartbreak makes him more open to love, not less. He takes the worst that the world throws at him, and he turns it into fuel for kindness. And that's not weakness. That's the opposite of weakness. That's the kind of strength that most people will never have, because most people, reasonably, understandably, defensibly, choose the wall. I've spent a long time now going through the specific episodes, the specific moments, the specific indignities that define Butters' journey through 28 seasons of South Park. And if you're still with me, whether you're wide awake or half asleep, whether you've been following every detail or letting the words wash over you like background noise on a quiet night, I want to take a step back here as we start to wind down and talk about what all of this adds up to. Because the individual episodes are important. They're the evidence, the texture, the proof. But the real tragedy of Butters isn't in any single episode. It's in the accumulation. It's in the fact that this kid has been abused by his parents, betrayed by his friends, manipulated by Cartman, exploited by the show itself, and he keeps going. He keeps showing up. He keeps knocking on the boys' door and asking if they want to play. He keeps telling his parents he loves them. He keeps trusting that tomorrow might be different, that the next person might be kinder, that the world might finally recognize that he's been good this whole time and reward him for it. And the world never does. That's the tragedy. Not any single event, but the pattern. The relentless, 28-season-long pattern of a good kid getting punished for being good. There's a psychological concept called resilience that I think applies here. Resilience isn't about not getting hurt. It's about getting hurt and continuing to function. It's about absorbing damage and finding a way to keep moving forward. The research on resilience in children, particularly children who've experienced emotional abuse, identifies certain protective factors that allow some kids to survive what would break others. Optimism is one. Humor is another. The capacity to find meaning in adversity. The ability to maintain hope even when evidence suggests hope is irrational. Butters has all of these. Every single one. And he has them not because the show gives him easy wins or happy endings. It doesn't. But because they're built into who he is. His resilience isn't a reward. It's a trait. He came into this world kind, and 28 seasons of cruelty haven't been enough to beat it out of him. And there's a question buried in that observation that I think is worth asking, even though the show never does. Where does Butters' resilience come from? Not psychologically. We've covered that. I mean narratively. Why did Parker and Stone create a character who can absorb infinite damage and never break? Was it a deliberate choice? Did they set out to build the most resilient character in adult animation? Or did it happen the way Butters himself happened? Accidentally, organically, through the slow accumulation of stories and jokes and moments that gradually revealed something nobody planned? I think it's the latter. I think Butters' resilience is an emergent property of the show's structure. South Park needs its characters to reset every week. Nobody learns. Nobody changes. That's the premise. And for most characters, that reset is just a narrative convenience. Stan forgets his lessons. Kyle's moral speeches go unheeded. Cartman faces no lasting consequences. But for Butters, the reset means something different. Because Butters isn't resetting to a default state of cynicism or selfishness or moral neutrality. He's resetting to kindness. Every single week, after every single horror, Butters goes back to being kind. And over 28 seasons, that pattern, that relentless, involuntary, structurally mandated return to goodness, becomes its own form of heroism. Butters is resilient because the show requires him to be, and the show requires him to be because it has no idea what to do with a permanently broken Butters. A Butters who stops forgiving. A Butters who learns his lesson and builds a wall. That character would be realistic, but it wouldn't be Butters. And the show needs Butters the way a body needs a heart. I think that's why people love Butters more than any other South Park character. Not because he's the funniest or the coolest or the most interesting, though he might be all of those things depending on the episode. People love Butters because he survives. In a world that the show has spent decades establishing as fundamentally hostile, absurd, and unfair, Butters survives intact. His kindness survives. His capacity to feel survives. And that survival, quiet, unglamorous, largely unrecognized by the characters around him, is the most hopeful thing South Park has ever created. There's one more thing I want to say about why Butters matters, and it has to do with the show itself. Not just what it says about the world, but what it says about its own creators. Trey Parker and Matt Stone built a show on the premise that nothing is sacred, that everything deserves to be mocked, that sentimentality is a form of dishonesty, and the only truthful response to the absurdity of existence is laughter. They've maintained that position for nearly 3 decades, through controversy after controversy, through every cultural shift and political upheaval, through every attempt to label them, or categorize them, or claim them for one side or another. Their commitment to irreverence is total. And then they made Butters. A character who is entirely sincere. A character who is never ironic. A character who means everything he says and feels everything he feels and never ever pretends to be above it. Butters is the most sentimental character on the most anti-sentimental show in television history, and the show loves him for it. You can feel it in the writing. You can feel it in how the big emotional moments are constructed. The beautiful sadness speech wasn't written by people who think sincerity is ridiculous. It was written by people who needed to express something sincere and found the only character in their show who could do it. Butters is Parker and Stone's heart. He's the part of them that still believes, despite everything, that kindness matters and feelings are real and it's okay to be hurt by the world. They've hidden that part of themselves behind layers of comedy and cynicism and shock value. But Butters is where it lives. And every time they write a Butters scene that lands, every time the audience laughs and then catches their breath because the laughter is sitting right next to something painful, that's Parker and Stone admitting, through the only character they trust to carry it, that they care. About people. About pain. About the small, helpless, infinitely valuable experience of being alive and feeling things in a world that doesn't always want you to. The show walks a fine line with Butters, and it always has. Every episode is both laughing at him and crying for him. Every joke at his expense is also a testament to his strength. The humor comes from how out of place his innocence is in this world, and the emotion comes from the fact that he refuses to abandon it. You can watch any Butters episode and see the comedy, but if you look a little closer, if you let yourself sit with what's actually happening to this kid, you'll see the tragedy too. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the genius of the character. He works on every level. As a joke, he's hilarious. As a character study, he's devastating. As a philosophical statement, he's profound. And as a mirror for the audience, as a reflection of every viewer who has ever been too kind, too trusting, too willing to see the best in people who didn't deserve it, he's unforgettable. I think Butters Stotch might be the most important character South Park ever created. Not the most popular, not the most iconic, the most important. Because he's the proof that even in a show designed to tear everything down, something gentle can survive. Something can refuse to become hard and cold and cynical, no matter how many reasons the world gives it to do exactly that. Butters' optimism isn't naivety. I used to think it was. I think a lot of people do at first. They see this kid getting pushed around and forgiving everyone, and they think, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand how bad things are. He's too innocent to see the cruelty for what it is. But that's wrong. Butters sees it. He's seen his mother try to drown him. He's been locked in a bomb shelter. He's been sent to conversion therapy. He's been grounded 1,000 times for crimes he didn't commit. He sees the cruelty. He just chooses not to let it win. And that choice, made over and over again, episode after episode, season after season, isn't innocence. It's strength. It's the quiet, unshowy, deeply human strength of someone who knows exactly how bad things can get and decides to be kind anyway. The tragedy of Butters Stotch isn't that bad things happen to him. Bad things happen to everyone in South Park. The tragedy is that the world keeps doing it, and he keeps forgiving. He keeps opening himself up to people who will hurt him. He keeps believing that the next time will be different. And the deepest, most aching part of it is that he might be right. Not because the world changes. It doesn't. Not in South Park. But because Butters' willingness to keep believing is, in itself, a kind of victory. He won't become them. He can't. It's not in him. And as long as Butters exists, stammering and nervous and desperately kind, rubbing his knuckles together and saying, "Oh, hamburgers," when the world falls apart around him, South Park has proof that goodness can survive anything, even South Park. And maybe that's the final, deepest layer of the tragedy. Not what happens to Butters, but what Butters represents about all of us. Every person watching this video knows what it feels like to be too much, too sensitive, too trusting, too willing to see the best in people who don't deserve it. We've all been Butters at some point. We've all been the one who believed the lie, who trusted the wrong person, who opened our heart to someone who used it as a doormat. And most of us, somewhere along the way, decided to stop doing that. We built the wall. We developed the edge. We learned to protect ourselves by caring a little less, trusting a little less, feeling a little less. Butters never does that. And watching him refuse to do that, watching him take hit after hit after hit and still choose openness over armor, is both inspiring and devastating. Because we know he's going to get hurt again. We know the next episode will bring another betrayal, another manipulation, another grounding he doesn't deserve. And we know he'll forgive it. He'll absorb it. He'll show up the next day with that same nervous smile, and that same hopeful little voice, and that same unbreakable belief that people are fundamentally good. It's beautiful. And it's unbearable. And it's the reason that Butters Stotch, a cartoon character in a show about 4 foul-mouthed kids in Colorado, has made more people cry than most prestige dramas manage in their entire run. 28 seasons, hundreds of episodes, thousands of jokes. And at the center of it all, a kid named Leopold, who everyone calls Butters, who just wants people to be nice to each other, and who never, ever stops believing they will be. That's not naivety. That's not stupidity. That's love. The purest, most stubbornly irrational, most profoundly human form of love there is. The kind that doesn't flinch. The kind that keeps its hands open even after they've been burned. The kind that looks at the evidence, all of it, decades of evidence that the world is cruel and people are selfish and trust is a mistake, and says, I don't care. I'm going to be kind anyway. I'm going to believe anyway. I'm going to love anyway. That's Butters Stotch. That's always been Butters Stotch. And South Park, for all its cynicism, for all its brutality, for all its willingness to tear apart everything sacred and profane, and in between, has never been able to extinguish that. 28 seasons, hundreds of episodes, thousands of opportunities to finally, permanently break this character. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't put the light out. And I don't think they ever will. So that's the story of Butters Stotch. Or at least, that's as much of it as we can tell in one sitting. 28 seasons is a long time, and Butters has been there for almost all of it. First in the background, then on the sidelines, and finally at the center of the show's biggest emotional moments. We started tonight with a question, even if I didn't say it out loud. We started with a blonde kid in a blue jacket following his dad through the streets of South Park, and we ended up here, 2 hours later, having traced the full arc of a character who began as nobody, and became, I think, the most emotionally important figure in one of the longest-running shows in television history. The question was, why does a cartoon character make us feel this way? Why does a kid drawn out of construction paper, voiced by a guy in a recording booth, animated in a week on computers in a studio in Los Angeles, why does he get under our skin the way he does? And I think the answer is that Butters isn't really a cartoon character. Not in the way that matters. He's a feeling. He's that feeling you get when you see someone being kind to a person who doesn't deserve it. That pang you feel when a child forgives an adult who hasn't earned forgiveness. That specific, aching, impossible to name emotion that sits somewhere between admiration and grief. The recognition that goodness exists and that the world makes it suffer for existing. We all carry a version of Butters inside us. The version that wants to trust. The version that wants to believe. The version that looks at the worst of what people do and chooses, stubbornly, irrationally, beautifully, to see the best. Most of us have learned to keep that version quiet, to protect it behind layers of sarcasm and skepticism, and carefully maintain distance. Because we learned, the same way Butters learned, that openness gets punished. But Butters never silences that version. He lets it speak. He lets it lead. And that's why he matters. Not because he's perfect. He's not. Not because his life is a lesson. It's too complicated for that. He matters because he's the character who proves that South Park, for all its armor, still believes in something. He's the crack in the cynicism. The light that gets in. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you're still awake, and honestly, if you fell asleep somewhere around the raisin section, that's perfectly fine. That's what we're here for. I want you to take one thing with you. Whether you're awake or drifting off, let this settle in somewhere. Think about the people in your life who are like Butters. The ones who keep showing up. The ones who keep being kind even when it costs them. The ones who could be harder, colder, safer, but choose not to be. Those people are rare, and they're worth protecting. They're worth telling that you see them, because a lot of the time, nobody does. Thank you all so much for watching, and for being part of this community. It really does mean the world. I say that in every video, and I mean it more every time. Because this channel, Papertown, exists because of you. Every video we make is for you. For the people who show up at midnight and put this on because they want to fall asleep thinking about something that matters. For the people who leave comments saying that these videos helped them through a rough night, or gave them a new way to think about a show they've loved for years. That's not nothing. That's everything. You give us that gift every time you press play, and we don't take it lightly. So from me to you, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever kind of night you're having, thank you. For listening. For caring. For being the kind of person who spends 2 hours thinking about why a cartoon kid deserves better. That says something about you. Something good. Sleep well, everyone. And if you're feeling a little sad tonight, for any reason at all, about a person, or a place, or a version of yourself that you miss, or something you lost that you can't get back, that's okay. It's more than okay. It just means something good happened to you once. Something real. Something that mattered enough to leave a mark on you that time can't erase. That's not tragedy. That's not weakness. That's the most human thing there is. That's proof you're alive. Good night, everyone. Sleep well. And oh, hamburgers. I almost forgot to say it. Good night.